Okay, the second part is about the forms and the principle of a good strategy. So, what principles and form does a good strategy need? And I mean a good strategy because creating any strategy is relatively simple. So, the very first part that we're going to look at in this section is about the forms and principles of a strategy that needs to be simple. There's no two ways about it. You need to have something that is simple to retell as well, and it needs to be simple to understand. Because a good strategy is communicated often to all kinds of stakeholders and it might change, you want to make sure that people have the same understanding. I cannot tell you how many times in my career as well, if we talk about the same things, or like we think that we're talking about the same things, we're absolutely not talking about the same things. This goes from very basic things like monthly active users, or when we're talking about a very specific market, people are actually starting to understand different things under different or the same terms even. You should not obsess over terminology. It's important. This is about creating alignment, and you should still keep simple language. Don't use abbreviations if you absolutely do not have to. The strategy is for everyone in your company, as much as support, marketing, sales, product growth. Doesn't really matter. Don't obsess over the terminology and keep simple language. This is about creating alignment. This is about the outcome that you have in the end. So what about the scope of a good strategy? A strategy does not have to be on a company-wide scope. So if you're thinking about a strategy that you are going to facilitate, it does not need to be huge, right? But it can be. It can be quite big. But the goal is to create something that is in a scope that is applicable to wherever stage your business is. It can be about teams. It can be about your domains. It can be about a one-person business, of course. It can be about branches in a specific company. And you can also have a strategy that is just like, overarching. And then you have sub-strategies connecting to that. But the principle for all of them is by and large the same. The length and the time frame of a strategy, it needs to be long enough to prevent frequent reprioritization. So I'm not going to tell you that all the strategies are 5 years into the future. Most of them are, because that's also where the discounted cash flow is being calculated from investors. But still, this does not mean that you have to go for 5 years, especially if you're early in the stage of a company. Then you might even have a strategy that goes for like 6 to 12 months, something like this. It really depends on where you stand. But you want to prevent that there's constant reprioritization because people are just going for the newest stuff. But it needs to also be short-term enough to give realistic guidance. And this is quite important. You still want to make sure that your goals are not somewhere in the sky and nobody can relate to them. If you are, as a pre-product market fit company, giving out a strategy that goes for like 5-6 years, nobody can follow it because you're so early in the company. It's very difficult to predict the market anyways. You might not have found your product market fit, and this is just not going to help in the bigger picture. So who creates the strategy? There's two ways about it. The first one is it's mostly driven top-down, so that means management decides. If it's bottoms up, then the teams decide, right? So like the people who are operatively working on it. Usually the way that we are seeing it in tech is that we're driving mostly a mix. So this is a part of it is driven from top down. So the management decides, and then the rest is filled in by bottoms up. So a very popular form of this is that you have the broad strategy defined by management together with leadership people in the company. And then the individual domains have another separate strategy that is addressing the top strategy. It's not as complicated as it sounds. And we're not going to get into it in detail in this course, but that's the principle, right? So like it's up to you to decide on whether you want to do this as a collaborative effort with everyone or just from the top management. In the end, any strategy is about alignment. It answers two very important questions. Where do we go? But also where do we not go? If you understand where you're not going, which segments not to address, this is extremely valuable in itself because if everybody is aligned, you will get much, much faster to your destination. And even if you go into the wrong direction, you still will know whether you actually went into the wrong direction. That has value as well, especially if you're trying to figure out 2 acquisition channels or like 2 different customer profiles, that kind of stuff. That's why this is important as well. So, as a summary, it should be simple. The scope can vary. Try to make sure that you're finding your scope, and you will find it's not that hard. It needs to be long enough, and there's a top, bottoms, and a mixed form, of course, right? So like you will also know what works best for you. If you're new to it, then it's probably going to top down. It will mostly come from you, but you can make this as a company exercise if you want. In the end, this is about alignment. This is a communication tool to align people. Don't forget that before you create documents that are too big and too complicated and convoluted. All right, that concludes this section. In the next one, we're going to look at market analysis, trends, and where to find them.